Yo, this is Dorki. Welcome to my Blood Death Knight guide for Dragonflight. I will mostly be covering M+ specifically. If you are completely new to the game or the class, you might want to start off by checking out a Wowhead guide to learn the basics. For the talent build, this is my recommended build for most players. On the base tree, we have a lot of utility spec'd into. We've got Blinding Sleet, Asphyxiate, and Anti-Magic Zone. If you really don't want this much utility, you could drop some points and pick up Permafrost over Blinding Sleet. You could also pick up Grip of the Dead, or you could pick up Unholy Bond for more passive damage. On the Blood spec tree, this is a really defensive build, which I highly recommend you guys playing. If you play at a higher level, you could drop Hemo for Rune Tap. You could also drop a lot of these defensive options for more damage if you really want more damage, by dropping Umbilicus for Bloodshot, or Improve Vampiric Blood for Improved Heart Strike, and Hemo and Foul Bulwark for Heartbreaker. However, I recommend just playing this build. You don't need that much damage as a tank in M+. For stats, this one is an interesting one. Historically, we've preferred haste and versatility. However, with the more damage coming from Shattering Bones, D&D, Blood Plague, and Bloodshot, Mastery becomes a very powerful stat. Defensively, Mastery is much more powerful now because of all the talents that buff Blood Shield. The only downside to Mastery is the lack of defensiveness against magic damage. As usual, Autumn level will be king, but when given a choice, I'd prioritize Verse and Mastery, with haste as a close choice. Before we get into the rotation, let's talk about what you should track so you'll have a better understanding of what to do in an encounter. Blood Decay has much more to track than before. To simplify it, on your UI, we will primarily focus on runes, runic power, bone shield, death and decay, icy talons, and arrow cooldowns. Now let's talk about rotation a bit. Always keep bone shield above 5, always be in D&D, and try not to let your icy talons drop. This is why in my UI, I keep track of bone shield, D&D, and icy talons at all times. Icy Talon is kept up by Death Striking, and Heart Strike is used for building runic power to Death Strike. We have a lot more ways of building Bone Shield than older versions of DK. Death's Caress now gives Bone Shield and should be used at the beginning of pulls when grouping mobs together. Try to always start pulls with Dancing Rune Weapon to get 5 extra stacks of Bone Shield. Abomination Live will also be used for generating Bone Shield whenever available. So to start a pull off, we will want to hit as many mobs as possible with Blood Boil while grouping them up. Start generating Bone Shields and Runic Power as you group with Death's Caress, Marrowrend, and Heart Strike. Once planted, keep Death and Decay down at all times. You should aim to have as high uptime on D&D as possible. When the mobs are grouped, use Dancing Rune Weapon, Abomination Limb, Eternal Rune Weapon, and Raise Ghoul. A-Bomb Limb, Eternal Rune Weapon, and Raise Ghoul can all be macroed to one button, simplifying it a lot. Once Dancing Weapon is on cooldown, use Tombstone in your D&D for massive burst of damage through Shattering Bones. This will generate a ton of fret and cut the cooldown on Dancing Rune Weapon by 25 seconds. Be sure to also Blood Boil early in your Dancing Rune Weapon for damage. From here, just Heart Strike to generate, Death Strike to spend, and Blood Boil for damage. At the end of your Rune Weapon, make sure you refresh your Bone Shield one more time. The most important thing is to stay in your D&D, keep your Bone Shield up, and Death Striking at least once every 6 to 8 seconds. Be sure to also use Dancing Rune Weapon and Tombstone frequently. Make sure you're always on cooldown. And most importantly, make sure you Tombstone after your D&D. For defensive play, with this build, Vampiric Blood is insanely powerful. Vamp Blood CD is so short that you can use it off CD. Just use it every time it's up. During cooldowns, try not to Death Strike too often. Pooling Runic Power in your cooldown and relying on external healing is the safest play you can make. However, this does not mean overcamping your Runic Power or dropping Coagulopathy. A good Blood Death Knight player should be able to consistently sit at high Runic Power to always have healing ready. For advanced play or min-maxing, most of the min-maxing comes from keeping high uptime on all the things I've mentioned you should track. Try to optimize D&D uptime in your runs and never let Coagulopathy drop. Bone Shield refresh timing matters a lot now as well. Death's Caress is more rune efficient than Marrowrend at Bone Shield generating, but is not as global efficient. In other words, just use Marrowrend unless you are out of range or low on runes. The more important thing is to not waste your runes on generating Bone Shield when your Dancing Rune Weapon or A-Bomb Limb is about to come off cooldown. Try to use Dancing Rune Weapon and Tombstone as often as possible. For general gameplay, try to make use of all your utility. DKs have gained so much utility this expansion, with Blinding Sleet, Asphyxiate, 2 charges of Grip, and Abomination Limb. DKs can lock down a ton of dangerous mob casts with all these buttons, and you can even spec into utility like Gorfien's Grasp or D&D Slow for a lot of scenarios like Spiteful. There are also a lot of dungeons with AoE stops, where Gorfien's Grasp would be really useful. AMZ will be insanely powerful as well with all the high group damage in these Dragonflight dungeons. That is all for the guide. DK will be tricky to pick up if you are new to the class, but once you get into the rhythm, it can be simple. The beauty of DK is you will feel like you have the tools to deal with any situation in M+. Anyways, thanks for watching, have fun in Dragonflight.